Have you ever been told if it didn't happen while you were working, the VA won't cover it? If you've ever heard that before, I'm here to tell you it's one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear from veterans all the time. Because what I'm about to tell you could completely change the way that you look at your military service. What's going on, everyone? Eric the Bearded Vet here. I'm a 100% disabled Air Force veteran. And after more than a decade of denials, appeals, and finally reaching 100% P&T, I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way. My goal is to help you avoid making the same mistakes. So if you're here to better understand the VA claims process, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with other veterans because you never know whose life this information could change. Now let's jump into it. My biggest misunderstanding was when I first got out of the Air Force. And I honestly believed that the VA only cared about injuries that actually happened while I was actually doing my job. And if I got hurt during work, sure. If I got injured during training, absolutely. But if something happened after work, on the weekends, while I was off duty, or maybe I was just living my life on base, I figured none of that mattered. And I couldn't have been more wrong. So I'll give you a perfect example from my own service. In basic training, when I was qualifying with the M16, just like everybody else, I had my hearing protection in. But during qualifications, one of the earplugs fell out. Now, if you've ever qualified with your weapon before, you know you're not going to stop the entire range because one person's hearing plug came loose. The firing continued. I had no choice but to continue shooting. From that day forward, my hearing was never the same. I've dealt with hearing loss. I deal with tinnitus. And in one moment, in just a few seconds, it changed me for the rest of my life. So today, both of these conditions are So the big lesson here, what so many veterans don't realize is the VA isn't asking, were you on the clock? They're asking, did this happen during your military service? When you raise your right hand in interactive duty, you're serving 24 hours a day, not just 8 to 5. So if you're stationed somewhere and you get into a car accident, you break your leg playing basketball, you need surgery. You slip down a flight of stairs, burn yourself while cooking. You got food poisoning. You need stitches, or you end up with a permanent scar. Or better yet, you suffer another injury while serving. Those may all be potentially become service-connected disabilities, not because you are working, but because they happened during your military service. So here's a real life example. I've talked to veterans who've never ever mentioned their knee surgery before, their broken wrist, their shoulder injury from a unit sport, their motorcycle accident, their scars, the concussion that they got, because they just assumed it was part of my job, or I wasn't working, I was just having fun, or I was on PTO, I was on leave when it happened. The VA doesn't automatically think that way. Every claim is different. But don't rule yourself out before you even understand what may qualify. So, in fact, let me tell you about another veteran that I spoke with, and maybe this will drive the point home. I asked him, what conditions are you rated for? And he said, honestly, Eric, I think the only thing I could ever claim is tinnitus. So I told him, well, tell me about your time in the military. Where were you stationed? He smiled and said, Hawaii. I said, man, that's awesome. You don't know how many of us would have loved that assignment. And I said, what was that like? He said, I absolutely loved it. He learned how to surf while he was stationed there. He told me, one day, he got a little overconfident. He paddled out to catch a wave that was much bigger than he should have. The wave slammed him. It dragged him underwater. It threw him into a reef. He cut his leg open so badly that he had to be rushed to the emergency room. Then he said something that immediately caught my attention. He looked at me and said, honestly, I thought I was going to die in that situation. That's where I stopped him. I said, hold on. I said, well, let's talk about that. I said, first, that scar on your leg could potentially be a compensatable disability. Second, you experienced an event where you genuinely feared for your life. Now, does that automatically mean someone has PTSD? No. PTSD is a medical diagnosis, and only a qualified mental health professional can actually determine whether someone meets the diagnosed criteria. But what shocked him was realizing that just because he was suffering and wasn't working didn't automatically mean that the event didn't matter. It happened while he was on active duty. He had spent years believing that none of it counted, and I can't tell you how many veterans I've met who think exactly the same thing. So here's the takeaway from this. And this is what I want you to remember. Stop trying to decide for the VA what does or doesn't qualify. Your job is to tell your story. Your job is to document your injuries, and your job is to seek treatment when something happens. Then let the medical evidence and the VA regulations determine whether it's service connected or not. Because one little injury that seems insignificant today could become a lifelong problem 20 years from now. Trust me, you don't want to be sitting at your kitchen table 20 years later trying to remember dates, hospitals, or exactly what happened because you never thought it would matter. So now I want to hear from you. What happened during your military service that you never thought could qualify as a VA disability? Drop it down in the comments. I'd love to read your stories, and you might even help another veteran realize that they're not alone. And if you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with another veteran. You never know, this one video might help somebody discover a benefit that they've been missing for years. So again, this is Eric the Bearded Vet. I'll see you next time.